Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
Two stories by Bo Bandy. Q-tip in the brain. The warning is well known. Do not stick them in your ear canals. It's displayed prominently all over the product packaging. Instead, the box goes on to list some recommended uses. Sadly, the manufacturer's marketing department couldn't even come up with 4 valid alternatives without repeating one of them. It's just them doing the due diligence to discourage the risky purpose that most people actually use them for. One could infer that at least one person had gouged around and ruptured his eardrum during a blind fishing expedition. With the heavy label discouragement on the box, the legal team hoped to avoid future lawsuits. It's what corporate lawyers do when litigious customers do what they do. Despite these known health risks, we still use them against stated recommendations. How else are we going to clean out the unsightly wax in our ears? We depend on the thick cotton balls on the end to be soft and sterile. We also trust ourselves to know how deeply to plunge. It's a daily gamble. At some point, generic beauty aid suppliers started offering comparable cotton swabs at cheaper price. The problem is, they occasionally skimp on the quality, and everyone knows it. Their generic product is typically little more than a sharp toothpick with a tiny dot of cotton on each end. No thanks. While everyone in the world was deliberately misusing them against the listed directions, almost no one wanted to take a big safety gamble with subpar generics. The original brand name product maintained an impressive market share. As if to seal the nail in the business coffins of the generic manufacturers, they started offering a deluxe swab. Reportedly, it had 30% more cotton on the ends. This diversification of the product broadened their market share even more. As a further incentive to buy the deluxe product, a special item was reported to be hidden in every 500th container. If you found this oversized token in your box, it was redeemable for cash and special prizes. I can tell you, I'm not a gambler, so I've always bought the deluxe swabs just for the extra layer of protection. I never expected to find one of the prizes. Honestly, that never even crossed my mind. Many, many things never crossed my mind. Naturally, when I did find it, I was seriously surprised. I'd never won anything of significance in my life. I held the package under a light to read about how to redeem my prize, whatever it may be. There was a tiny SKU on the item itself, which I was required to enter in the sweepstakes web form. Then I was supposed to take a photo and email it to the company for initial verification. Once preliminary registration was complete, I was supposed to set aside this winning swab for safekeeping and authentication later for corporate officials. This is where my odd story takes a very wrong turn. From the comically large novelty Q-tip, I never thought anyone in my household would try to use it for anything. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Not that I thought it would matter, mind you. I just thought of it as a comically large novelty item. Unbeknown to both me and the manufacturer, the promotional company who made the winning item installed an exploding tip on it. The deeply flawed idea was to film a spokesperson strike the tip like a match to confirm it was the official winner on camera. It was supposed to be captured live for a realistic surprise reaction in a series of promotional TV advertisements. They didn't think anyone would use it for anything either, so both ends were live. The truth is, no one in their right mind would jam something that large and point it into their ear canal. That would be highly illogical. But infants and people with mental impairments do exist. My father-in-law is one such individual. Once possessed with a towering intellect, he suffered a debilitating decline in recent years from Alzheimer's disease. It was terrible to witness how he'd become a shadow of his former self. My wife couldn't accept the idea of putting him in an assisted living or a retirement home, so he came to live with us a couple of years ago. Because I still remembered the fiercely independent, proud man he once was, there are times when I have failed to child-proof the house. That innocent mistake was on me, and it led to a series of life-changing events which I'll relate to you now. She actually found him lying on the bathroom floor. The old man let out an agonizing shriek and shook violently in protracted seizures. His eardrum was ruptured and burned from the small amount of flammable material on the ends. Blood was everywhere. The large shaft of the winning swab served to seal in the miniature explosion, preventing any of the pressure from escaping. It was a perfect storm of bodily damage and personal liability. For the longest time, we weren't even sure if he was going to survive. Doctors worked for several hours just to stabilize him. Then surgeons tried to repair the extensive tissue damage and internal brain injury. He was in a medically induced coma. The prognosis wasn't hopeful, and my wife was beside herself. She blamed me for leaving the novelty swab in a place where he could find it. I didn't even try to argue that we aren't exactly trained or equipped to deal with those kinds of specialized situations. She just needed to vent, and I had left it out. Mea culpa. Against the odds, his condition slowly improved. He had scarring and burns around his right ear and permanent deafness, but his external wounds healed. They brought him out of the coma. The internal damage was going to take some time, and there was a serious risk of infection. The first few weeks after that were chaos, as we waited for him to pull through, but once he was out of the woods, I started noticing something very strange. The glassy, distant look in his eyes faded, and he started calling me by name. He hadn't done that in years. Even more bizarre, he seemed to be aware of his surroundings again. Of course, I knew Alzheimer's was irreversible, but it almost seemed like he was becoming his old self again. I didn't dare mention that to my wife, but I was starting to think he'd been misdiagnosed before. In just a few short weeks, it was as if he had had no memory recall issues, other than the deafness on the injured side. It felt like his debilitating mental fog had been mysteriously lifted. One day I could no longer keep those illogical thoughts to myself. To my relief, my wife admitted she had also experienced similar thoughts, but was afraid to say anything. We compared notes and decided to approach his neurologist about it. I, for one, was very hesitant because most doctors can be very dismissive of their patients' family, offering medical diagnoses and theories. They are quick to point out that they are the experts and we are the laymen. Fortunately, His doctor was open to what we had to say. Later I realized that was because he too noticed my father-in-law's dramatic range of improvement. It was pretty hard to ignore at this point. A battery of tests were conducted, and the results were completely unexpected. My father-in-law's brain had somehow started to heal itself. The inactive outer layer was starting to spark back up. The brain scan showed his synapses were firing at a nearly normal adult level. His neurologist ordered a second round of tests because he was certain there was some kind of clerical mix-up at the lab. There wasn't. The impossible was really happening. The black layer was slowly fading. The replicated results validated our casual observations, but it was counter to every other dementia and Alzheimer's patient known to medical science. Teams of researchers swarmed to our regional hospital. Eventually, he was transferred to UCLA Research Center to figure out how a confirmed Alzheimer's patient had reversed his cognitive decline. There were a lot of skeptics and doubters among them, but all of them came to accept the data was valid, and his reversal was legitimate. It wasn't hard to connect the exploding Q-tip mishap with his miraculous recovery. But you know how scientists are. They aren't apt to believe in coincidence or random chance. They had to research things to decide if it was a factor. As for my wife and I, we don't need any more proof. Her father received an invaluable gift, all courtesy of an exploding novelty cotton swab. Never steal from the dead. I'm a mortician's assistant. That's even less glamorous than it might sound. If you believe the icky job of preparing a dead person for public viewing and burial is unpleasant, just imagine what his lackey does. At least his pay is good. I make a third of what he makes, and I do most of the heavy lifting. It's very frustrating. I have bills to pay, too. In the funeral business, we perform a vital service, and much like other industries, the figureheads receive the lion's share of the praise and financial rewards. Those of us who work behind the scenes basically receive the scraps. I only explain the inner workings of the mortician business because I have a cautionary tale to reveal. When you handle dead bodies every day, you become desensitized to it. It's a natural coping mechanism. Our funeral director is a model of decorum, but behind the curtain, it's a different story. We do what must be done while the director maintains his facade of respectability for the benefit of the family. We cut up just like everyone else does at work. The average person would be appalled at the antics that go on for prep, but what they don't know won't hurt them. At least that's what I thought. It's not uncommon for the family to provide a display case full of jewelry for their departed. I suppose that's a carryover from ancient times when people believed the dead needed worldly possessions for barter in the afterlife. Often those necklaces, rings, and bracelets are costume junk of no real value. Other times, the family wants to bury Grandma with a fortune in precious jewels. Why, I ask myself? If there is no afterlife, or it's non-corporeal, what is the point in material possessions? I suppose I'm trying to justify what I'm about to admit. It's not like I broke into a retail store and made off with all their precious merchandise. I simply pocketed a 5-carat diamond ring from an elderly lady that was about to be buried in the ground forever. She didn't need it, I had convinced myself. It was a huge waste of money, and I didn't think the family would ever know. The casket was open, but her hands were below the viewing area, and I had a car payment due. And these people were throwing away $5,000 on silly sentimentality. It was madness, I felt. I would have never broken into the lady's home and take it from her, and if she was still alive. I wouldn't dream of doing that. In that case, the ring would obviously still belong to her. As far as I was concerned, she was gone, in an absolute sense, and her family was willingly discarding it for some incomprehensible reasons. They were about to pitch a small fortune in a wooden box and bury it. I realize I'm justifying a legitimate crime in the eyes of the law, but I honestly felt it was a victimless crime which no one would ever know about. I was wrong. Thankfully, the funeral and burial went without a hitch. I was terrified one of the mourners would reach in to touch her hand and realize the huge rock was missing. When no one did and the lid was sealed, I breathed a sigh of relief. I could pawn it in a week or two to make my car payment and set aside a few extra bucks for a rainy day. That evening there was a number of odd things which happened to me, but I brushed them off as paranoia. First of which was an unusually strong thunderstorm that wasn't expected in my area. I had just checked the news and there was 0 chance of bad weather. And yet a huge electrical storm was in full force. Stranger, it was isolated to my local neighborhood. I could see clear skies a block away. It didn't make sense. Then my doorbell kept ringing. I looked out the window several times, but didn't see anyone on the porch. I figured it was pranksters messing with me. When I confirmed that no one was hiding around the corner, I decided it was tied to the lightning. After it kept happening, I opened the door to investigate further. Let me tell you, I was in for a huge reality check. Or rather, a surreality check. On my front porch stoop was the animated corpse of Mrs. Baxter, the lady I had commandeered the huge diamond ring from. She didn't look amused. I stood there in disbelief. I was fully awake, and it was definitely the body of the person I had seen lowered into the ground earlier that day. I had assisted with the embalming and the other mortician procedures. I knew she was dead. There was no question about it. But I didn't preoccupy myself with the logistics of how a corpse was animated, how she had removed herself from the coffin, or how she managed to dig through 6 feet of soil above her. At the moment, none of that mattered. I was sure that little old Mrs. Baxter had an axe to grind with me. Why else would a corpse be on my front porch? She either came for justice or the satisfying taste of cold revenge. I assumed there wasn't much I could do to dissuade her. Whatever dark forces propelled her to my front porch that evening wouldn't be stopped with a deft karate chop or fancy footwork. Nope. I was doomed. I braced for the karmic punishment of stealing from the dead. There had to be a really severe price to pay for that. Instead, the little old lady silently outstretched her palm. Her eyes were still stitched shut, but the implication was clear.
Give me back what is mine.
Instead of turning, I slowly backed up until I was inside the threshold of my living room. Despite the undead on my doorstep, I didn't shut the door on her. That would be rude, right? I reached under the corner of my entertainment stand and pulled out the massive ring from its hiding place. Somehow I managed to walk back towards her. Slowly I placed the gleaming gem back on her finger where it belonged. I stammered a lame apology about not realizing she needed it any longer, but she appeared to be in no mood to hear it.
The underworld requires a long, difficult journey.
She snarled through stitched lips.
The ferryman seats his passengers according to the quality of their payment. I'm not riding in steerage because some snot-nosed millennial mortician's assistant was greedy and took my ferry tribute. Don't ever steal from the dead again, young man. They need their valuables. I'm late for my final journey, or you'll pay for your cowardly little larceny.
With that ominous warning and threat, she was gone. The thunder died, and the lightning immediately subsided. It was a moral lesson I won't soon forget. Don't take from the deceased. They will want them back, and there will be an ugly, supernatural price to pay. So quoth this raven. I would like to thank you, my darlings, for joining me at my chateau in my little library. A thank you to Bo for his always wonderful works. And a special thank you to my Patreon supporters, Ermin Case, Darren and Jennifer Dot, and Calistinic. If you like this, please hit the little button to let me know. If you didn't, hit the little button to let me know. Leave a comment. I'm always glad to talk with you, my darlings. I'm open to suggestions and criticisms, critiques. If you have not subscribed, please do so and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will talk to you next time, my darlings. Farewell.